Now that the dust has settled, let's talk about the aftermath of the AMD GPU launch, and we have more coming next week with the third-party custom cards. Is that going to be another disaster? Hey guys, Tiago here. Today I'm going to cover two important topics. First is going to be the aftermath of yesterday's launch, and there's actually a lot to talk about here, not only in terms of the GPU themselves, but also sort of on the personal and emotional impact on all of the gamers that were looking forward to yet another GPU release. And then secondly, of course, we're going to talk about next week. There are more third-party custom cards coming from AMD. The first batch that we got yesterday are basically just the reference cards. All of the custom AIB partners like Asus and MSI will be launching their GPU soon, and is that launch going to be any better? So first, let's talk about the aftermath of the AMD launch. Now, a lot of gamers and enthusiasts were looking forward to yet another GPU launch. There's going to be a few reasons for this. First, they really couldn't get any of the Nvidia RTX 3080s, 90s, and even most likely the 3070, so a lot of people were gearing up for a new generation of GPU gaming. And secondly, this is AMD's real first glimpse at the high end against Nvidia in a very long time. They've certainly had high-end GPUs way in the past, but recently certainly nothing that's going to challenge the likes of a 2080 Ti from Nvidia. So this is the first time that they're really bringing very competitive performance to the likes of the 3080 and 3090, which pretty much surprised everybody. A lot of hype around these GPUs, which kind of shows you why everybody was really excited. And of course, with AMD's Ryzen, how they've been able to deal with Intel and produce really high-performing products for great prices, they've really built a lot of great consumer trust, and people were really expecting that to transfer over a little bit more on the GPU side, and that's where we come sort of to the aftermath of this launch. I think a lot of people, actually myself included, were shocked to see just how low the stock was for this launch. Now, I understand all of the issues that are going on now. I understand all of the worldwide manufacturing issues. I understand this is the reference model from AMD, so it's not the third-party cards, which hopefully may be available a little bit more, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the video. Anyway, look at what actually happens to a consumer. Let's break it down to an actual person, a human being. It's somebody either waking up really early to try to get a chance at get one of these GPUs, or even more extreme, look at all of the people that actually waited in line, even in the cold, a day or more before at micro centers across the country. In some places, we're talking about like 40 to 50 people camping out, waiting in line, only for the store to open, and they tell them, oh, we got maybe two 6800 XTs and maybe 10 6800s. Well, most of those people are going to be going home either with like a 5700 XT or just very, very disappointed. So I understand building up hype and having everybody go crazy over the GPUs, but I think, for example, if AMD knew the stock was going to be really this low, and it looks to me that it's either as bad or lower than the RTX 3080, I think instead of hyping that up, they could have at least warned people a little bit more. Maybe say this launch is going to be really, really limited. Maybe make it very clear. They're still going to sell out of them. So I think they could have been a little bit more transparent. I mean, a few partners like Asus did mention it was going to be very limited, but even some people on AMD's own side mentioned this wasn't going to be a paper launch, maybe hinting that there was going to be a lot of stock and availability, or at least enough to keep up with some type of demand. Was really an extremely limited launch. Like, we're not just talking about extremely high demand here. When you have a store that's as big as Micro Center, and they're usually in very big populated areas, when you have literally like 10 to 12 GPUs for a major launch, I don't think that's high demand. That's really low stock. I mean, there's no way around this. So in a way, it would make sense for them to just be a little more transparent as to what the stock is going to be, or at least explain to people why the stock is so low. Is it a manufacturing issue? As I mentioned on one of my videos yesterday, I'm going to try to talk to somebody sort of in the industry, so that way we get a better view of what's going on, because let's face the truth here, a lot of consumers are just frustrated. And if they had a little bit better idea exactly what happens behind the scenes to make this so difficult, and I do think these product launches certainly are difficult, there's a lot of difficulty in manufacturing, I just think that people should know a little bit more about how the actual process works. That way they'll be a little bit more realistic and less frustrated when they try to get one of these very sought after products. So I think the major issue with these GPU launches from Nvidia and AMD as well, I think there's just too much disorganization and too much confusion as to how the actual launch is happening. Now, I don't know if some people think that sort of this hype and being in the dark is what really builds up the hype even more and gets people to want these products, but in the end, it doesn't represent a really good consumer experience. Let me give you an example. Like for the launch yesterday, a lot of people expected it maybe to come out at 9 a.m. or something like that, but a lot of places that were supposed to have them, just like Best Buy, they seemed like they never really came online, or if they did, they disappeared very quickly. It just basically said coming soon. Even on Newegg, if you searched, it was difficult to find these when they initially came out. You find you had to put in the right combination of the GPU names. Not to mention AMD's own site, you have to keep refreshing. Very difficult to find something on there. So that's why these launches are very frustrating. Nobody really knows what's going on, and I know there's a better way to do these launches. Let's take an example from a massive company like Apple. Their launches, at least recently, everything seems to go pretty smooth. There's a lot of transparency. For example, let's say if you want the latest iPhone, maybe a few days before or the day before, they let you actually choose it on your phone, get your app set up, and they'll tell you this phone is going to come out, I don't know, 9 a.m. So that way, when it actually comes out, you're pretty much ready to go. Sometimes you may have a little glitch with the app, or there may be a lot of demand on the servers, but in general, things do go pretty smoothly, and you never get sort of a sold out button or anything like that. The worst that's going to happen, instead of getting your delivery in a week, it may go 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, but at least Apple will give you some type of time frame, some type of transparency. People are certainly paying a lot of money for these items, so I think with these launches, they can definitely take an example from Apple, and that's why a company like Apple has developed such loyal fans that will go and buy their products, because they don't have extremely frustrating launches like this. I bet you after the Nvidia launch, people thought they were going to get AMD and they would be happy to switch over. After AMD didn't do well, they thought, oh, let me switch back to Nvidia. So neither company is really building up that much consumer trust with these issues, and I understand that the actual stock and the actual manufacturing may be slow, but I think that they need to communicate this a little bit better to the consumer, especially before a launch. I mean, do they really want to see 50 people lined up at a Micro Center knowing fully well that there's going to be no more than 10 GPUs available? You can make a case that maybe for the first launch, like the RTX 3080, maybe Nvidia really didn't know that the demand was this big, but by the time that we got to the 3070, and also by the time we got to these AMD GPUs, these companies are smart, so they know that the demand is out there. So if they can't keep up with the demand, I certainly think they have to be a little bit more transparent. And our second point, speaking of new GPUs, next week is when the third-party custom cards, like from Asus and MSI, are supposed to be coming out. Now, most likely the supply of the AMD reference cards, you can assume, are going to be more limited. I would guess most of the stock in the PCBs probably went to the third-party partners. So we're going to have to see exactly what goes on next week. But I'm going to tell you guys now, be realistic. I think the stock is going to be pretty much the same thing that we've been experiencing. There's no need anymore to hype it up. Oh, we're going to be able to get this, we're going to be able to get that. Because I think although we're going to see a little bit better increase in the actual stock numbers, GPUs, especially the 6800 XT, which seemed like it barely existed during this initial launch, are going to be very hard to come by. Now, a while back, I do appreciate that Asus, I think in Europe, they did come out and say that the launch was going to be extremely limited. So that's the type of stuff that we need to hear before the launch and not after, because at least if people set their expectations to a realistic level, then when the launch actually happens, if they don't get the GPU, they're going to know that, okay, it was limited already. I knew this. But if they went in thinking that AMD was going to come in with better stock and save the day with the RTX GPU launch issues, then in general, they're certainly going to be a lot more frustrated. So that type of transparency certainly is very appreciated. So next week, how do I think the stock and the availability will be? Well, even though I think it might be slightly better than sort of the initial AMD reference cards launch, that's not really saying much because those cards launched in such low numbers that it was definitely pretty ridiculous. So hopefully the next launch of the custom cards, maybe it's at least the level of the 3070. And it is kind of crazy to say that because the 3070 launch really wasn't that great either. It was really very, very limited, even though more people did get more cards than on the 3080. If the custom Big Navi launch is at least at the level of the 3070, at least that's something, and it's better than sort of the embarrassing numbers that we got from the reference GPUs. But of course, we would hope that it's a lot better, but I really don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a couple of months before we really start to see this stabilize. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's well into next year sometime in a few months before we really start to see anything that resembles sort of a more interesting level of stock. So for now, we're sort of at the mercy of this entire system. All that we can do is really wait until stock levels get better. better, because even if you couldn't find the GPU, it's even frustrating now trying to look for one. People don't know exactly when they're going to drop. People are always afraid of bots and scalpers getting to the GPUs first. So it's certainly a very frustrating time to find this new hardware, and I guess people feel like they have to play some type of game in order to be able to even find these GPUs, which certainly doesn't represent a very good consumer experience. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys on the next video.